Hello, friends. Welcome back to Monday School. So today we're just going to look at the, again, bird's eye view, literary context, what's going on behind the scenes, in a sense, in the book of Jonah. And to do that, we need to understand Hebrew poetry, in a sense, right? So the book of Jonah is what is commonly called a chiasm, right? So in the description, or perhaps we'll have a little diagram.
On the screen? Yeah.
On the screen. As we're talking about it, hopefully, we have the elements of the chiasm showing up.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So like right about here. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, let's make sense of this real quick. So a chiasm is essentially a literary structure that kind of follows this pattern, right? A, B, C, A, B, C. Right? So, for instance, it's hard. I'm trying to think of a chiasm off the top of my head, just like make one up. Genesis is a good one, right? Where you have the first 3 days are the first 3 days. Well, I guess days 1, 2, and 3 correspond respectively to days 4, 5, and 6, right? Where you have 1 corresponds to 4, so those are the A's, right? And then 2 corresponds to 5, those are the B's, and then 3 corresponds to 6, and that'll be C. Right? If you're lost, we'll do Genesis shortly. but something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And so we see that in the book of Jonah, right? You have this. You start off with, let's say, the word of the Lord comes to Jonah, right? Then Jonah goes, right? Whether he goes where God told him or not, it's just a matter of the fact. It's just he goes. So A, the Lord calls Jonah. B, Jonah goes. C, we have Gentiles repent, right? And then D, God relents of a calamity, right? So I'll show you what I mean, right? Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. That's Jonah chapter 1, verse 1, right? We have A, right? Arise, go to Nineveh, and Jonah leaves to Joppa, right? He runs away, right? That would be B. Then, as the story progresses, you have the storm. The sailors are kind of like freaking out. What do we do? And it says, then you have the sailors at the end of the chapter 1, right? Say, Lord, don't lay on us innocent blood, right? You, O Lord, have done as it pleased you, right? You have this sort of like the Gentiles are calling out to God. And then they throw him into the sea, and God relents of the storm, right? Mm-hmm. That would be the first instance, A, B, C, D, in a sense, right? We'd have an extra letter, right? But then we see a very similar pattern appear in Jonah chapter 3, where you have the Lord calls to Jonah the second time, right? That would be A. Then Jonah goes to Nineveh, that's B. The Gentiles call out to God, right? The king of Assyria has this whole long speech, right? That's C. And then God relents of the disaster, says he's not going to destroy Nineveh, that's D. So you have this pattern, this mirroring structure, if you will, right? As we're going through the story. Now, importantly, in a chiasm, we want to ask ourselves, A, what is the center of the chiasm, right? And then B, what are we leaving out, right? And sometimes the two are correlated, right? In the sense that what's left out is usually what's in the middle, right?
Oh, wait. Okay. Right. So you're looking for that element that exists between the two progressions, right? So 1, 2,
right.
3. 1, 2, 3. What's right in the middle of those two?
Right.
And then the other one is finding kind of the missing pieces.
Right. What parts of the story aren't a part of the pattern? Right.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, what do we have in the center of that chiasm?
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2, right? The first piece, A, B, C, D, covers pretty much the whole of chapter 1, mm-hmm. right? The second one covers the whole of chapter 2, or of chapter 3. I'm sorry, right? Chapter 2 kind of sits right in the middle, right? And it's this like almost like an awkward pause between the two elements of the story, where it's like, whoa, wait a minute, this doesn't fit the pattern, right? It's right in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're going to want to pay attention to, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's left out?
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4 is left out,
Mm.
right? We have, it ends with God relenting from the disaster. And as a matter of fact, even as you're reading the story of Jonah, right? Matter of fact, there's a, I guess I'm just reminded, there's like a little kid's Bible, like right there. And the story ends in Jonah chapter 3, right? Chapter 3 concludes, and the kid's Bible says we're done. That's the story of Jonah, folks.
It's Sunday school for
It's
you.
Sunday school, right? Because just I guess subconsciously, literally speaking, that's where the story should end, right?
Right.
We've completed the pattern, right? Nineveh repents, God relents of the disaster, happy clappy, everybody's okay.
Yeah, like chapter 4 almost feels like an epilogue.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
Right?
Do you think the chiasm has something to do with that, even subconsciously?
I think so,
Okay.
right? Certainly it's on purpose.
Okay.
I'm assuming that's what you mean, right? Like,
Yeah, I guess just Jonah has always felt to me like it's got that weird kind of like tag on the end of it.
Yeah,
Right? And
right.
I wonder if the chiasm, the fact that, I don't know, I wonder if the chiasm has something to do with that.
well,
The lack of.
the chiasm essentially is designed to create that tag at the end,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's designed to make you feel like, wait a minute, the story keeps going, right? But really it should end here, right?
Okay.
Like subconsciously speaking, even like try it at home, folks. read the story of Jonah and then read chapter 4 and ask yourself, could we have done without this, right? And from in the sense of a satisfying story. And in a lot of ways we could, right? We could just chop off chapter 4 and Jonah would, we'd hardly have anything to talk about, but it'd be a nice kid's story, right? And I suppose that's what the children's Bible does.
Mm-hmm.
But we have, again, this piece right here, chapter 4, and we have to ask ourselves, okay, wait a minute. So if this is being included, why is it being included, right? Why did the author choose to add this on, right? Deliberately making the ending unsatisfactory, right? But that's not all, folks, because there's a second kind of chiasm in Jonah, right? You have the ABC, right, structure, and then you have the ABC-CBA, right? Jonah also has this kind of chiasm in it. And we'll walk through the elements real quick, right? And on some of these, you're just going to have to trust me, right? You're going to have to take a leap of faith with me. We'll hopefully, as we go through, we'll explain why it is that these pieces are connected, right? But for now, just work with me.
Okay. All right. You're asking a lot, but I will try.
That I am. But should I do this? If you really have to know, if you're one of those people who really has to know, my email will be in the description.
Oh, just wait 2 episodes.
You'll wait till it's over. It's 2 months from now. But anyway, or figure it out. Anyway. So
Don't email him about that.
anyway, so chiasm number 2 in the book of Jonah, right? And again, we want to ask ourselves, what's the center and what's being left out, right? So again, we have at the tail ends, right? The Lord speaks to Jonah, right? You have the Lord speaking to Jonah at the beginning. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, right? On the tail end of the chiasm, it's in Jonah chapter 4, right? So, okay, we have something in Jonah chapter 4. And it's when God speaks to him saying, do you do well to be angry? Right? The Lord speaks to Jonah on the one end, the Lord speaks to Jonah on the other. Now you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute. The Lord speaks to Jonah at the end of chapter 4 as well. Why aren't we including that? Like I said, please trust me. Right? So we have these 2 tail ends, right? And again, it's gonna be kind of hard for me to explain this, but hopefully the diagram helps, right? because I'm going to be walking forward in one sense and backward in another, right?
Right.
So the word of the Lord comes to Jonah, son of Amittai, right? That name, Amittai, right, appears again in Jonah chapter 4, right, where Jonah says that God relents from disaster. And again, you may be thinking to yourself, what on earth, right? What does Amittai have to do with that? Patience, my friends. Patience.
Maybe you should email him. No.
Maybe, I mean, again, if you're like thinking I'm a heretic right now or whatever, yeah, email me, right? I'll do my best to explain.
I think you're good though.
Okay. So you have Amittai on the one hand, right? Relents from disaster on the other, right? Then it's arise, go to Nineveh, right? That great city, call out against it, for its evil has come up before me, right? Let me see if I got this right. So the word of the Lord, right? Word of the Lord. Then Amittai, relenting from disaster, right? Then it says that Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish, right? And then in chapter 4, it says, "Ah, Lord, was this not what I said when I was still in my country? Therefore I fled previously to Tarshish." Right? So Jonah flees to Tarshish. Jonah reminds God that he fled to Tarshish. Right? There's also this little bit here where it says, "But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry." This is chapter 4, verse 1. Right? And I suspect that corresponds to what it says down here in Jonah chapter 1, verse 4. "But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea." Right? That doubling up. Right? There was a great wind, and then a mighty tempest. Right? In the Hebrew, it's a great wind, a mighty tempest. Or a great wind, a great tempest. Right? And those two are described as being evil. Right? They're evils. At the same time, you have this in the book of Jonah, right, where it says, "It displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry." In the Hebrew, he was greatly angry. He was very angry. Right? This doubling up of anger. Right? It's doubling up of anger, doubling up of the evil. Right? Potential little link there. Right? I'm not too happy about that one in terms of as a peg per se. So that's like a 50-50.
Well, because
Maybe.
the word for anger is the same as the word for evil in Hebrew, right?
Not quite. The word evil does have a lot, it's a very broad term, but the word anger here is a different one. Then on top of that, you have the fact that it's a great wind and a great tempest. When it's talking about Jonah, though, he was greatly angry, he was very angry. It's slightly different, right? At least I think that's the case. Anyway, it doesn't quite fit. Anyway, so that's like a maybe for me, right? Just figured I'd throw it out there, just in case. Then again, moving forward through the story, right? You have this bit where the captain says, "What do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call on your God. Perhaps your God will consider us so that we may not perish." Right? Going back into chapter 3, you have the king of Nineveh say pretty much the same thing. Right? "Who can tell if God will turn and relent and turn away from his fierce anger so that we will not perish?" Right? So we have this little link. Again, we're continuing to crawl our way backwards through the story of Jonah.
Yeah.
Right? We have here, "Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day journey in extent." Right? It has the words "in extent," I suppose, here. So your version may not have it. Anyway, 3 days journey. Right? Then again, chapter 1, right, toward the end of chapter 1, it says, "Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." Right? So you have 3 days and 3 days. Right?
Okay.
So those are the main elements of the chiasm as far as I can tell. Right? I'll give you your Bible back.
Oh, thank you.
So again, let's look at this for a moment. We have this structure. What is in the center?
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2, once again, finds its way into the center of the chiasm, right? I mean, just straight up, right? 3 days,
Right.
3 days, 3 days. Right in the middle is Jonah chapter 2. So we have two cases in which chapter 2 forms the main focus of the story of Jonah, right? Mm-hmm. It's doubly emphasized. Mm-hmm. This is important, right? And once again, we have our little kitty Bible over there, which probably doesn't include this prayer. And I imagine most people probably just skip it, right? And if you do read it, it's very difficult to understand. We'll have a whole podcast dedicated to it. Because really, whatever happens in the story of Jonah, that's where everything turns, right? If we want to understand the book of Jonah, we have to understand that prayer and know why it is that Jonah prayed what he prayed.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So that's the key thing. What's left out?
The end of chapter 4.
The end of chapter 4, right? Everything after God says, do you do well to be angry, right? So then I think after that, it's like, so Jonah left Nineveh and built himself a little tent or a booth or whatever you want to call it, right? Everything from there unto the end, that's, again, left out. Right. And again, we tend to read that bit and kind of wonder to ourselves, like, what on earth is happening, right? Like, why did it end like this, right? Why does God end by talking about cattle? Yeah. And I think there's, again, something very deliberate on the author's part as to why he's doing this, why he's making the ending so purposely unsatisfactory, right? You have these two wonderful patterns in the book of Jonah. They both focus on this key point in the text, right? And then you just have this end bit. It's kind of like, oh yeah, and then this. But he didn't really have to say that now, did he? Like, it's just bizarre, I guess. And have you seen the VeggieTales, Jonah, by any chance?
No.
No. I love the way they do it. It's like,
oh yes, I have.
Okay, because I mean, VeggieTales does actually include this tail bit ending.
Yes,
right?
It does.
And it literally just like, you have Jonah, he's like screaming after the little caterpillar, and then just drops out. And it's like, that's the end of the story. It's like,
yeah,
like it leaves it as abrupt as it is in the book of Jonah. And again, we want to ask ourselves, why, right? Clearly, the author had something that he really wanted to get off his chest, right? And hopefully, in understanding that end bit, we'll understand the rest of the story better, right? Because somehow this does tie in.
Right.
Right? So that's the other question we want to ask ourselves. These two tail bit ends, this bit of chapter 4, right? What on earth is happening here? Right? And then Jonah's prayer in the fish. Why does Jonah pray what he prays? Right? Does his prayer, we can even ask the question, does his prayer make sense? Which is a dangerous question to ask about the Bible, but here we are, right? I think that's about all I wanted to cover today.
So I have a question for you.
Sounds good. Let's hear it.
Do you know who wrote the book of Jonah?
Ooh, that's a fun question. It probably wasn't Jonah, right? Only because, again, it seems to have a knowledge of events that are going to transpire after Jonah's dead, right? That being the Assyrian invasion, right? Now, on the other hand, he's a prophet, right? Perhaps he knew, right? He had some sense of what's going on. And I think I would like to put Jonah at a relatively early date in terms of when it was written, but I don't think Jonah wrote it. He did, however, survive, right? The story kind of drops out, and you're wondering, Jonah's kind of left in the heat of the desert. Seems like he's dead, right? But he's good. He survives. We know that historically, right? His tomb, I believe. Oh, that's a fun thing that we didn't mention. Oh, we didn't mention that. Oh dear. Anyway,
whoever's editing this is gonna have fun.
You're gonna have a blast. His tomb is is like 4 miles from Nazareth. Right? It's like literally 4 miles from where Jesus grows up. Right? So Jonah does survive this episode in Nineveh. He gets out. Somehow, some way he makes it. Right? Anything else?
Yeah.
Oh, so to more directly answer your question, it's hard to know who wrote Jonah.
Okay.
Maybe prophets usually had like students, right? So maybe a student of Jonah's.
But it seems like they were pretty astute student
Right.
to
They
incorporate these what are they called again?
like this literary structure, this chiasm,
This
right?
chiasm in there, yeah. These
Yeah.
double chiasms that
It's so incredibly complex. Like for a teeny little book that you can barely find if you're like looking for it in the Bible.
as we just discovered.
Like it's remarkably intricate.
Yeah.
And like try it at home. It's very difficult to do. Like so the fact that he's incorporating this, and then as we see, the way that he ties scripture together is just remarkable. So I guess 2 weeks from now we're going to drop the Jonah 1 episode. Before that happens, please do read the book of Jonah. Right? Look it over. Ask yourself these questions. Right? See if you can. I guess looking at the story, you'll probably see the chiasm a little more clearly. Right? You'll start to see a little bit some of the patterns. Right? I mean, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I'll see y'all laters.